Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Telford Wrekin Council Planning Committee. This evening's meeting is held in public to ensure that all those involved or interested in the planning applications can see and hear how the decisions are made. It's important that the speakers are able to present their information without interruption and that the council members of the committee are able to hear and consider the material presented. Only those people who have been notified are able to speak. I ask everyone else to remain quiet, not to interrupt the meeting and to allow the members to make their decisions. I remind everyone that council meetings can be photographed or recorded. I'd ask all participants to recognise the importance of the planning process and please let everyone silence or turn off their mobile phones. Welcome to the meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from absence from Councillor Raj Mehta and Councillor Kuldip Sahota as substitutes, and from Councillor Graham Cook and Councillor Stephen Reynolds as substitute.
Thank you. Apart from that, everybody's here. Okay. Any declarations of interest? Item 2. No. Item 3, the minutes of the previous meeting. These were held no date on this one.
25th of August, Chair.
25th of August they were held. Just to open it up, yeah. Are there true and correct record?
Yep.
All agreed? Right. A true and correct record then. NEMCON. No deferred or withdrawn applications. There are no site visits planned, either, Bell?
No, Chair.
Thank you. And the plan application for determination is Appendix B. And it's the only one on there tonight, so we'll take that now. So it's agenda item 6A, and it's TWC 2010/0828, land at Ironstone, Lawley, Telford. Val, do you want to introduce it?
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for a deed variation against Phase 10 of the Lawley application. It was considered at committee on the 25th of August and deferred to seek further clarifications around the viability report.
Thank you. I have 3 public speakers on this one. Councillor John York, the parish councillor. Welcome again, John.
Thank you, sir. It's a bit of a habit. Councillors, should we really be here discussing this application again? The August committee live feed clearly shows a formal vote for rejection was taken and recorded. Then an officer suggested an alternative of deferral purely because of the vote result. This was, despite against procedural process in our view, voted on and agreed. One presumes that committee members are not aware that my council, following the meeting, immediately filed a complaint to the authority, highlighting the incorrect procedure followed, and asked that the original vote be reinstated. Yet, here we are again discussing the same application. Another adverse decision will exacerbate the already doubtful deferral decision taken in August. We have been blessed with a response to our Stage 1 corporate complaint. The response confirmed all the committee actions we detailed as totally true in detail. However, it goes on to say, the first vote taken was not a vote by committee to refuse the application, but simply a vote to reject the report recommendation. For a decision to refuse to have been made, refusal would have had to be proposed and seconded and voted upon. Councillors, let's be honest, this is just a play on words, but if adopted as your standard, gives little credence to the standing of this committee, its members and the planning authority, and the future of the planning process in Telford. Think of the implications such a distorted modus operandi as suggested will bring. In my 36 years of local government service and committee attendance, never have I seen such a derogation of due process, committee manipulation and destruction of a democratic procedure. In the event this committee decide to forge ahead and consider make an officer conforming decision, my council and the electorate we represent ask you to strongly consider the history of the Lawley Sue development. On the preceding 7 phases, developers have been allowed to reduce conditioned affordable housing figures, yet they still achieve favourable profit margins, this developer included. Profit still exists on the site, so it should not be down to the taxpayer to fund a developer's design mistake via a possible grant from Homes England. Politicians are elected to fight the ordinary man's corner. History is littered with political parties and pursuit of causes, many achieved despite negativity from the policy and policy makers. In passing, let us mention the Ironbridge development, refused despite threat by officers of appeal costs by Shropshire County Planning Committee because only 5% affordable properties were proposed and little to service or placate the populace. Result, no appeal, 10% affordable housing, £1 million towards healthcare facility, hundreds of thousands for road improvements, all approved this week. Now is the time for this committee to support the people or seriously compromise this planning authority's policies and future ability to make meaningful decisions for the rest of its tenure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, John. Mrs. Jacqueline York, please. Welcome, Mrs. York. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. I should point out that I am the wife of Councillor York, but I speak entirely in my own right as a very disgruntled Lawley resident, annoyed at this council's regular unwillingness to enforce the Section 106 and planning conditions that it agrees. I've reviewed the live feeds of these planning meetings, becoming increasingly frustrated by the ease with which committee can be so easily persuaded and cajoled to vote with officers' recommendations or a developer's desire, always at the fear of appeal costs. We have all heard of statistics and damn lies, but this application takes the biscuit. August live feed clearly shows Miss Hume attempting to convince members they'd agreed the viability report for 0% at June's meeting. That statement is totally untrue, as that meeting agreed the recommended 10% affordable with the developers' representatives' approval. In fact, the viability report has never been accepted in its own right. In simple terms, the viability report uses house prices for December 19. The updated report of May 2020 makes no allowance for property price increases, and the now almost 2-year time span price explosion has not even been considered. It's interesting to note that the house sale value of the site has increased from 37.3 million in 2019 to a minimum of 43 million at today's prices. I appreciate the assessment is deeper than this, but surely a 5.7 million increase in income is a policy-changing factor. The lady officer also highlights reliance upon use of outside consultants to verify the viability, as the skill set does not exist within the council. Given this shortfall in professional ability, it perhaps is time for this committee to exhibit backbone, and as Councillor Loveridge said at August meeting, to not let the people down by not providing the affordable housing they desire and need. Time has come to fight the applicants' greed. There are a number of regional planning barrister chambers available for the work and to provide the expertise and knowledge this council apparently is sadly lacking. Surely this Labour-controlled council has a commitment to its mantra and a planning policy obligation of housing available to as wide a cross-section of people as possible. Councillor Sahota earlier this month went to press about the Tory party donors from the building industry paying for planning favours. Support of this recommendation is surely as damning as the unpleasant practice he cites. There may be a cost involved. Isn't it better to spend on something constructive, such as fighting developer and shareholders' greed, rather than the pointless exercise of painting a flag on Telford Park or a similar futile zero cost benefit return scheme? There is, of course, the £16 million fund just announced for a cleaner, greener, sustainable Telford. Affordable new design-built properties certainly are sustainable. You must find that backbone and support the people, not the greed of the developers or the scaremongering of the officers. Thank you.
Mrs. York. Ian Greatrex, please, from Bridgehouse Consulting.
Okay.
Okay, Ian, yes.
Good afternoon. I'm Ian Greatrex and I prepared the Lawley Phase 10 viability submission for Taylor Wimpey. I just want to run through a bit of background because I think there are some issues with dates in the various reports. Before this planning committee approved the Phase 10 Reserve Matters application in March 2019, the committee's then in-house viability specialist concluded that Taylor Wimpey would be within its rights to argue that this phase could not deliver any Section 106 affordable housing. Between March 2019 and March 2020, it became apparent that the site-specific abnormal costs for Phase 10 were about £600,000 higher than had been anticipated, mainly due to the ground conditions on site and the cost of the green retaining wall. Having previously prepared the Phase 11 submission, in April last year, Taylor Wimpey asked me to submit a case seeking a further concession to the affordable housing obligation on Phase 10. I made it quite clear to my clients that I would only submit a case if it was fully justified, robust and defendable. I'm not in the business of submitting cases that I don't believe in and I don't support. So the approach I adopted to my assessment was entirely consistent with the latest government viability guidelines as of September 2019. Your consultants, the council's consultants, reviewed every aspect of my submission, including all of the detailed supporting information on costs. In their report to the council last October, so not last May or March, last October, they also concluded that Phase 10 cannot support any Section 106 affordable housing. Last month, this committee raised a number of legitimate queries about that Turley report. We've responded to those, and they're covered in your officer's update report. Yes, there were a number of minor errors, but nothing that would change the overall conclusion. Viabilities are carried out at a point in time. Yes, the Turley's report is now 12 months old, but if we were asked to redo our submission today, and picking up the point that's recently been made, it would show that bill costs have increased by at least 3%, probably significantly more, because that's based on RICS data, which is always a slight lag to the real construction cost. Whereas the actual selling prices that Taylor Wimpey have achieved over the last 12 months are exactly in line with the forecast that we submitted last May. There's been no increase in the selling prices at Lawley on the 65 homes that Taylor Wimpey have either sold or exchanged unconditionally compared to the report valuation that we included. So all things being equal, as of today, the scheme viability has worsened relative to last year by about £400,000. I understand that you might feel backed into a corner or held to ransom, but scheme viability is a material planning consideration. Planning officers all across the country defer to specialist surveyors like Turley and cost consultants like Ryder Levitt Bucknell. If you disagree with their conclusions, then you're potentially asking them and your officers to defend the indefensible at appeal. To coin a phrase, you'll be throwing them under a bus. Taylor Wimpey have indicated that they're willing to work with the registered provider to deliver 19 affordable dwellings within Phase 10. Based on the viability conclusion, they don't have to do that. They'll be worse off selling those 19 homes to a registered provider than selling those same 19 homes privately. But they're willing to do it, if the application is supported. So while it might be unpalatable, a decision to accept your own consultant's conclusion and your officer's recommendation and agree to this request actually provides the best chance of some affordable housing actually being delivered on Phase 10 at Lawley.
Thank you, Ian.
Okay.
Val, you want to come back?
Thank you, Chair. So as you're aware, the request is made by an applicant to vary the Section 106 agreement that's made for the delivery of affordable housing as the site is unable to support the original commitment. That was made in a different housing market. In accordance with national planning policies, we must consider this request, and as such it's necessary to provide supporting evidence to demonstrate this. This evidence has been independently assessed and verified on the Council's behalf. It concludes there is a substantial deficit of more than £1 million if the developer was to provide the obliged 12.5% of affordable housing required. There is therefore a need to reduce this number. Reducing this number to 0% still indicates a deficit of over 400,000. It will not provide the acceptable profits indicated by the National Planning Policy Framework, but it will improve that situation. Members considered this in detail in June and was set out in the initial committee report, and you accepted that the site was not viable. What members are being requested to consider is the changes to that resolution to 0% affordable housing through the Section 106 commitment. Members considered the amended resolution, which suggested that 10% was available. However, the developer is unable to access the grant funding on that resolution and therefore unable to fulfil that request. Members are therefore being asked to reconsider that. Members considered that in August, and you deferred this on raising some questions in relation to those viability, and that's been addressed in the report. You've also raised concerns over those current land values. Evidence has been provided over the last couple of weeks in relation to the sales values that have come forward over the last 12 months, and it demonstrates those actual sales values that are assumed in the viability report. There's been no uplift. On the other hand, it is compounded by the rise of construction costs, and you've heard this evening from the developer that's around about 3%. From our independent surveyor, they reckon they have concluded it's actually about 9% at this moment in time because of that significant rise. The deficit on the site then still remains and is progressively increasing. The returns are below the suggested profit margin that's set out in national policy, and we are obliged to consider that in detail to recognise, in accordance with national policy, the scheme cannot provide all the obligations. The scheme has provided approximately £13 million in Section 106 contributions, in addition to the on-site delivery of affordable housing. It's also noting that there was £180,000 which has been provided for the off-site specialist accommodation. As the site is well underway, we can therefore only consider the commitments which are outstanding and cannot reassess the whole package. It's recognised that affordable housing provided through the Section 106 has been reduced on certain phases, but this has been based on evidential and interrogated information. Furthermore, it's also noted that outside of the request, the developers are willing to work with the chosen RSL, which is Wrekin Housing Group, to provide the on-site affordable. This can only be achieved through grant funding. Grant funding is recognised to be incredibly important to the delivery of affordable housing across the borough. Over the last 5 years, 1,600 affordable homes have been completed in the borough, and approximately 1,000 of these are outside of those Section 106 agreements. That's 61%. This demonstrates that the actual high delivery rates setting outside of the Section 106 agreements. The reason being around this is, in general, a new build house property is worth about 45 to 50% of the open market value when it's provided as a social rented accommodation through the Section 106 agreement. With the grant funding, it can actually achieve 80% of the open market value and therefore improve that viability. You've also seen over the last couple of days a commitment from Wrekin Housing Group to work with the developer in applying for that grant funding, supporting this application. We therefore understand that there is that commitment to deliver affordable housing outside of the Section 106. But members, you are being asked tonight to consider the issue around viability and the provision of 0%, and therefore the recommendation is still the same, that sets out that the deed of variation provides 0% affordable housing on phase 10.
Thank you, Val. It's up to the committee now then. Peter.
Just a question really. I mean, I must say, listening to the speakers, it makes me feel grubby, to be honest. It really does. I feel I'm being battered into submission on this, and it's really upsetting that we can't fight back. We're toothless in a sense. we have to draw a line at some point and say to developers, don't come to us with an unviable proposition. We must do that in the future without a doubt. Anyway, the question I was going to ask is about the letter we had from Wrekin Housing Trust, which says they're excited to be purchasing the units. So is that definite? And if it's definite, can we have it in as a condition of the agreement?
Okay, so in terms of how the grant funding works, it cannot be assigned to being an affordable property inside either Section 106 agreement or through condition. Okay, grant funding can only work beyond that, and that's just how the system's set, and we have got no control over that. In terms of then the letter that's in front of you, it was effectively given board approval by Wrekin Housing Group yesterday that's subject to the approval of the 0% affordable housing, that Wrekin Housing Group can make a grant funding application to Homes England alongside the developer. So we've got as much commitment as we can from the RSL and from the developer in terms of that making that application. We can't guarantee it, however, and that is the point around the 0% request for affordable housing.
Okay. Do you understand the position I'm sure others are coming from on this? It really does feel, I mean, even reading this, it seems like a list of things they're going to hit us with to say, pass it, pass it, pass it, or else, you know. It's not a very nice feeling to be put in. We're not determining this, are we? We're rubber stamping, and it really is an upsetting situation to be in. At the moment, my head says I'll have to go with it. My heart says don't. I'll leave it until everyone else has spoken, but I'm very concerned about the position we've been put in, and I hope in future. In fact, is there a possibility that we could all abstain and pass it back to you, and you could pass it?
No, we have to make a decision tonight, Peter.
Well, we made one last time, and look what happened.
You didn't make one last time.
We did.
Because
We did.
You did not give the reasons for not passing. So then somebody proposed that we defer and come back again. That's what's happened. Okay? So you can't ask them to pass it back to the office because this is not in their domain to do it. It's called, is it?
Well, in theory, but you obviously as a single councillor can't speak on behalf of other councillors about the way they're going to vote, but in theory, if everyone did abstain, we wouldn't have a resolution to operate on, but you'd have to, if you wanted officers to make a decision on behalf of council members, it's very an unusual thing to be asking members to do, officers to do.
What would happen if everybody abstained?
But in theory, I suppose it is possible. But it's a very. I mean, members are here to make a decision, aren't they? Make a determination, inform a view. And I think that's the sensible.
Called it. Sorry.
There was another point you raised as well.
Around the decision that was made and the resolution.
Yeah. Yes. Whether there's if Mr. York's summary is correct and his summary of the response appears to be correct in that yes, a proper decision was made. There was a motion was put, it was proposed, it was seconded, it was voted upon. You have to then move on to that was defeating the recommendation. Then you have to move on to what to do next. And the thing that members resolved to do next was to defer. So procedurally, I'm entirely satisfied that was the correct way to go forward. And so that's why we're here today, to reconsider it again, which I think was what members resolved to do last time. So procedurally, I'm entirely comfortable, if that helps.
Thank you.
Actually, Chair, you have answered it because one of the questions that was asked by one of the councillors was that original decision should stand, but I think you explained that situation. And the other the issue was that I feel uneasy, my colleague sitting on the left, that's saying we sit here, just a rubber stamp it. We look at the application in detail and then, we decide with advice from the councillors and the legals what is it that is the best. And we do not rubber stamp anything. I never, at least, but I do go into the details before I make a decision, councillor. And thank you very much for your remark.
My pleasure.
Next. Nigel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just putting this letter in, I mean, when we had our viability training, the man said that if affordable housing is done by a social provider, well then affordable housing is not included in the viability assessment. So was that correct or not? I'll leave you to answer that later, because I might as well say the rest of what I was going to say. I mean, I've come to this not halfway through, a third of the way through, because it's, I feel a bit miffed really that one of the few planning meetings I missed was the June one. So I've had to sort of do a bit of catch up on this, reading the reports, and to try and work out what's happened. And on page 6 of our report, it says the report from the applicant had been misinterpreted. No, it hadn't been misinterpreted at all. I think the case for affordable housing reduction to 10% in June was made just as convincingly as that for 0% today is being put now. However, the information that we've been given is exactly the same. So we approved a reduction to 10%. We've had no more information, and we're now being told that it should be 0%. Well, I'm afraid I don't like that. I don't think that that's right. Now then, the thing is that the viability report is from 2019, and I appreciate all the dates that were being that were being told, but that's still 2 years ago. Now then, the government figures show that land values in Telford and Wrekin have increased by 14% over the 4 years leading up to the viability assessment. So all this pleading poverty by the developers doesn't wash. So it's questionable as to the validity of the viability assessment, and I think there's a case for actually having a new viability assessment. Because the thing is that when you've got a development that's going to take between 10 to 20 years, it's inevitable there's going to be changes. And you can't say that a viability assessment that was that was done however many years ago is still going to be valid today. I mean, we didn't have a pandemic 18 months ago, and you would think that the developers would want to do a new viability assessment if building costs have gone so high. Because you'd never get anything developed at all, because all the developers would be going bust, because they couldn't run a business like that. I mean, I've run a business now for 30 odd years, and you just can't do it. Now then, in the June report, it says that the levels of affordable housing shows that phase 7 and 8 was reduced to 15%, phases 5 and 9 12.5%, phase 11 10%. So as land values are rising, affordable housing levels are going down. Now then, that's not right, is it? Who's winning here? Is it the developer, or is it people that need homes? Now then, turning to the issue of the wall, which is, and I'm not talking about the game show here, Danny Dyer isn't going to make a guest appearance. But, yeah, thank God, yeah. But we see the cost of the rebuilt wall has not been resolved. Now, the report is incorrect to say that the costs cannot be deducted from the infrastructure costs. That doesn't make sense. I mean, the cost of rebuilding a wall which was done incorrectly and then was moved to cram more houses onto the site to make more profit for the developer who can't afford to make these and can't afford to do these affordable housing. This is where we're coming from. It's not our concern, because it would mean that any developer would have carte blanche to include any extra costs. If they start a development and the kids go in and start making graffiti all over the place, are they going to then say, well, we can't have any affordable housing because we've got to clean up the graffiti? That's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense at all. If a sinkhole, okay, then they should have checked on that. Now, if a sinkhole or mine workings appear and a new development falls into a hole, is that our concern? No, it's their concern because they should have known about it. So if they build a wall and it's in the wrong place or it's the wrong depth, well then why the hell do we have to lose affordable housings because they've made a mistake? You know, okay then, don't they have insurance or anything like that? They must have some form of site insurance. Now then, so quite honestly, I'm still not happy. I haven't had any new information at all to change my decision as to that I made last time. Now, okay then, so if somebody made a cock up in the report in June, which would appear to be what it is, and we're now trying desperately to cover our backs so that it doesn't have a cost to the council. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with a developer and, you know, sort of, you know, they're making millions of pounds here, and all we want is a few affordable houses. Now, Wrekin Housing Trust said that they'll do it, so I really, really don't understand where we're going from, and I fully support exactly what Councillor York and Mrs York said, because, and I agree yet again with my colleague here. We are being backed into a corner. Now, you know, I was chairman of the planning committee a few years ago, and as Val knows, you could never guarantee that an application would get through, because if I wasn't happy, I wouldn't support it, and there was very few planning meetings when I was chairman of the planning committee where they all got through and they all went with officer recommendation. Now then, the thing is that we didn't go bankrupt. We didn't get sued, we actually got what we wanted. And sometimes you just got to dig your heels in, and if we take a hit for it, well then we take a hit. But as has been pointed out, we are representatives of the people here. They put their trust in us, and really we should be doing our job here, because you know, sort of, this is what we're here to do. And like I said before, I do set myself up as judge and jury, because you're trying to work out what's the best course of action, and sometimes you've got to make the right decision even though your head may say differently.
Kelly.
I think just in terms of June, we were told that it was viability was 0, but that it was going to be 10%. So we never negotiated 10%. It was always a bonus amount. So that hasn't changed. And also, we are, I don't know if I ever say this right, quasi-judicial board, and I absolutely get it. But we are looking at legal reasons, aren't we? And if that's a material consideration we have to look at, I don't know more than that man who sat here earlier. I don't know about viability reports to that degree. I don't know about them. And I can't argue. I'm not trained in viability reporting, and I don't know how we're going to sit here unless we're trained in the same profession and we can sit and take him to task. I don't know that. Also, it's not a Labour-led council problem. We're following government guidelines, just to say, something to do with Labour Party, and I don't know why that comes up. It's not a political board, is it? But so it's not an opportunity to have political whack. But you know, this is a legal issue, and so however I feel about it, I just don't know how we can go against legal reasons. And that would be my view, and that's our job, isn't it? And our job is to sit here, look at the law, look at the parameters within that, and then that's our job. So that's not us rolling over, that's us doing what we want to. If you want to be popular, then this is not the right board, I would imagine. And sometimes we have to do things that don't make us popular. Be an ice cream man, it would be my answer. Sometimes we've got to do it. And I sometimes sit here and disagree as well. But this is not, what we're talking about isn't should we or shouldn't we, it's like, is this the law? That's our job. And sometimes it is frustrating, but that would be my view.
Kelly, anybody else?
Chair,
Janice?
I will say not a lot has changed my mind. I disagreed at the last meeting, and I'm still feeling apprehensive at this one. Nothing has really changed my mind about this application. Affordable housing. I do struggle with the length of time it's taken them to sit on this and to come now, 20 years later? And that should, I think, be addressed in future applications, and we shouldn't be in this situation. But like I say, nothing has really changed my mind.
Okay, thank you, Janice. Cole, if you want to come back?
I just wanted to, because my name was mentioned in public, am I allowed to clarify that statement? No.
Do you want to come back and make a point, yeah?
Yeah. Yes, I did make a statement in the public, but that was on a national issue. I think it was a month or two ago, we had a motion in the council, where the motion says that the government in the future, or near future, is going to introduce some rules and regulation which would make it easier for the developers to get their applications through. And the motion says that, well, this is that we ought to sort of fight the government. Now, I did say in the local newspaper that 18 million pounds was given by the developers to the Conservative Party in expectation of making it easier for them to pass these laws, and they can do it. So this is what my point is. I'm not a friend of the developers, I'm a friend of the public, and this is where I sit. And like my councillor on the right said, sometimes it is a difficult. I am a layman, I'm a small businessman. I don't know that. I only told by what this councillor believed to be the rules and regulation. I follow it, and then I vote according to that. So this was my statement. I did make it, and that was to say, we better get ready what the government is proposing in the future to make it easier for the developers to get their applications through. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ian?
Yes, Chairman. There's been mention about rules and regulations and guidance, which I have, as you're aware, studied some over a number of years and done a number of training courses run by the Planning Advisory Service. So this question of viability is a thorny one, as it's within the NPPF that we have to consider it. But I also noticed that during the consideration, we have to allow the developers to make a profit. Somewhere about 15–16%, I think, is included within the figures. And I feel that it is wrong that we should allow the developers to get their cut and our residents not get affordable housing. And from my planning training, I have to take into account, but it is up to me to make a decision whether I agree with the recommendation. I'm afraid that in this case I can't agree with the recommendation, and I feel that we should not allow this deed of variation, and they should be asked to provide the 10%. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ian. Anybody else?
Chair, I think the officers have done the best they could in the circumstances, and we sent them back. They came back, and and they done their best. On back of what Bell has said, I move the recommendation that we should accept it.
Just have an answer to my question.
In relation to the affordable housing being pulled out of the viability, which that was.
Yeah, the guy who gave us the training said that if a provider, social provider, was doing the affordable housing, or and the affordable housing was taken out of the viability assessment.
And that's where the affordable housing is, the applicant is the affordable housing provider. In this case, you haven't got an affordable housing provider.
No,
It's the applicant. This is a sale.
Where a developer agrees with a social housing provider that they will they will take over or have the affordable housing, or when it was taken out of the viability assessment. That's what he said.
I can't recall him saying that, in the sense of that, and Ian, you were with me on that training as well, because the affordable housing, if something is if it's going to be provided as affordable housing, there's obviously a value that's associated with that. And as I've demonstrated, set out tonight, that value that comes forward is actually 45 to 50% of the open market value. So there's a very significant deficit already on that value that the developer will get back from that property. So effectively what they're getting is the sale, isn't it, of creating, of just constructing it rather than the actual full entity. So with the housing grant, because it has to, and it can only come forward, and this isn't anything to do with our local policy, it's a national way in terms of how the housing grant is set up. It must be outside of that section 106, and it can lift that value of that property. So the RSL can purchase the property off the developer for approximately 80%. So the developer is then able to release effectively the unit to being a affordable unit rather than open market. So there's a commitment that we're seeing here from the developer and the RSL, Wrekin Housing Group, to deliver that outside of it, and the developer will still be at a loss because effectively it's 20% less than what the OMV should be.
If the developer doesn't apply for the grant, well then there'll be no affordable housing.
No.
So therefore the developer's won on both counts then. Yeah.
And
Okay.
but we're being clear in terms of that outside of the planning regime, but it's the planning regime can only control what's in that section 106 and those conditions. And we have got evidence very clearly that shows that there's a massive deficit, even with 0%. But it's the only thing in terms of a balance that we can bring to you to make that viable. As I've said, the development site itself has brought forward £13 million worth of section 106 contributions since the point it commenced. And there is a provision for, there's a contribution that's come forward to spend off-site for specialist accommodation, but it has to go on that specialist accommodation off-site. Cannot be used in any other way. So that there's nothing else left in that pot effectively to renegotiate.
Just, yes, the provision of affordable housing by a developer just is a significant. Yeah, the provision of affordable housing by a developer is a significant issue from a viability point of view. So I'm not quite understanding the recollection of what we said at the.
Well, I'll go back and check the notes. But
we talked about people have talked about rules and legal rules. The key legal rule that I think pervades this is that members have to base their decision on available evidence. You've received a technical report. Unless you've got technical evidence which is better than the technical report that you've received, you're in a very difficult position. It creates a difficulty for officers on an appeal scenario, in a judicial challenge scenario, where a decision has been based without supporting evidence. But what you have in front of you is a technical viability report which has been independently assessed. It says there's no, and we're talking about profit. At an appeal, it is, as Councillor Fletcher said, in an appeal scenario, the developer is entitled to take profit. It's something that will be considered on an appeal. It's how the viability assessment is worked out. But you've already heard that the profit's been impacted severely on this particular phase. I think in June the consistent position is that there is no profit in this phase, and that was said in June. It was unfortunate that the 10%. It was thought that the 10% was being offered on site. but that's been explained in 2 committee reports now that was a mistake. The viability has been consistently 0, so or less, and the information is there upon which members have got to form a decision. And the rule, as I say, is to base the decision on evidence that's put before you, and you're really in a realistic position to go against that if you've got better evidence that counters the evidence that's in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. It's been moved that we...
I'll second it, Chair.
It's seconded. All those in favour of the recommendation, please show. Those against? Abstentions? 2 abstentions, 2 against, and 5 for. So that recommendation goes through. Okay? Thank you.